He was the king of dollars and gold, in his mansion so grand, but his heart felt cold. Dressed as a beggar on a village street.
Henry, a wealthy man, lived in a big city. He had many expensive things, but he felt lonely. People only liked him because of his money, not because of who he was. Henry wanted to find someone who truly loved him. So, he came up with a plan. He would pretend to be a poor, crippled man and see if anyone would care for him. Henry's parents were worried about his plan. "What if someone recognizes you?" they asked. But Henry was determined. He left his mansion and went to a small village. There, he dressed in old clothes and sat in a wheelchair. He begged for money, hoping someone would help him. Many people walked by, but no one stopped. Then, one day, a kind girl named Sonia came by. She saw Henry and felt sorry for him. "Are you okay?" she asked. Henry was surprised by her kindness. "I'm just trying to survive," he said. Sonia gave him some money and asked if he had a place to stay. Henry said no, feeling a little guilty for lying. Sonia wanted to help Henry, but she needed to ask her father first. She went home and told her father, Donald, about Henry. Donald listened carefully and then thought about what to do. "Should I have done more, father?" Sonia asked. Donald smiled and said, "You did a good thing, Sonia. We'll talk about it more later." Donald, Destiny's father, pondered the beggar's plight. "No one should face the night alone," he said. "Go bring him here. We'll make room." Sonia smiled, grateful for her father's compassion. She returned to the spot where she'd left Henry, who still sat in his wheelchair, lost in thought. Sonia approached him gently. "My father wants you to come home with me. You can't stay here alone tonight." Henry's eyes widened in surprise. No one had ever offered him kindness without expecting something in return. With Sonia's help, Henry followed her to her humble home. As he entered, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced in years. Sonia and her father had little, but they shared what they had with a stranger. As Henry settled into the modest room, he realized he might have found what he'd been searching for. But guilt crept in. He was living a lie, pretending to be someone he wasn't. Over the next few days, Sonia and her father cared for Henry. They helped him with his daily needs and created a small garden for him to enjoy. Henry laughed and smiled with Sonia, feeling a sense of joy he'd thought was lost forever. One evening, as they sat together in the garden, Sonia asked, "You seem troubled sometimes. Is everything okay?" Henry hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Meanwhile, Henry's parents were worried about their son's disappearance. They'd heard nothing from him since he left, and his mother prayed anxiously for his safety. "I'm sure he's fine," his father reassured her, but his concern grew with each passing day. One cool evening, Donald sat beside Henry in the small garden, curiosity getting the better of him. "Henry, my friend," he began, "I've been wondering, what happened to you? How did you end up in that wheelchair?" Henry's heart skipped a beat as he hesitated, unsure of what answer was best to give him. He took a deep breath and shared his story. A few months ago, he'd been in a terrible car accident. His vehicle had skidded off the road, leaving him lucky to be alive, but with severe leg injuries. The doctors had told him he could walk again, but only with a costly surgery that was far beyond his means. Donald's expression softened with sympathy. He couldn't bear the thought of Henry suffering like this. As he looked at Henry, he saw the pain behind his eyes, and his heart went out to him. He made a silent decision. They had to do something to help him back to his feet. The next morning, Donald called Sonia aside during breakfast. "Sonia, I need to talk to you about Henry," he said quietly. "He needs surgery to walk again, but it's too expensive for him. I think we should help." Sonia's eyes widened with concern, but Donald continued, "We can start by selling some of our farm produce. It won't cover the entire cost, but it's a start." Sonia admired her father's generosity and determination. They didn't have much, but he always put others before himself. They decided to keep their plan a secret from Henry, fearing he might refuse their help. Sonia threw herself into the task, working harder on the farm to gather more produce to sell at the village market. Her father took care of the daily chores, but both father and daughter focused on raising funds for Henry's surgery. As Sonia sold her fresh produce at the market, she attracted the attention of Mark, a wealthy young man from the city. Mark instantly fell in love with Sonia and he tried to win her heart for months, offering her gifts and promises of a luxurious life if she would marry him. One day, MSRK approached Sonia again, making his usual proposal. "Sonia, why are you wasting your life in this village?" he asked. "I can offer you wealth, comfort, and a life of ease. Why do you refuse me?" Sonia remained calm, politely declining his offer. She didn't want the life Mark was offering, her simple life gave her peace. Mark grew frustrated, unable to understand why Sonia would choose to live in poverty. "You're a fool for wanting to stay in this dirty village," he spat, storming away in anger one of the days. Sonia paid no attention to him, rather she doubled her efforts and continued selling at the market, her heart heavy but her mind clear. She had chosen her path, and she had no regrets. Back at home, Donald and Sonia kept up their efforts to raise money for Henry's surgery. Every coin they earned went into a secret fund, but no matter how hard they worked, it seemed like they could never save enough. One afternoon, Rose, Sonia's best friend, came by her house, her face serious but with a hidden agenda. Mark had approached Rose earlier that day, offering her money in an attempt to help him talk to Sonia and persuade her to marry him. He was growing tired of her rejections and he had no choice other than to sought Rose's help. Rose, feeling important, accepted the money and agreed to help Mark. She believed Mark was a good match for Sonia, being rich, handsome, and willing to take her away from village life. Sitting with Sonia, Rose casually brought up the topic of Mark, reminding her of his numerous visits to the village and his persistent proposals. Rose emphasized the wealth and comfort that awaited Sonia if she accepted Mark's offer. Sonia, calm as always, looked at her friend and simply shook her head, uninterested in Mark's proposals. Rose pushed further, talking about the luxurious life Sonia could have in the city, with beautiful clothes and no need to work in the market. However, Sonia remained firm in her decision. She then revealed a surprise to Rose: she was starting to fall in love with Henry. Rose was taken aback, unable to believe what she had just heard. Sonia's confession sparked anger in Rose. She couldn't understand why her friend would choose poverty-stricken and a crippled man over a wealthy and handsome suitor like MSRK. Rose's words turned harsh, mocking Henry's appearance and circumstances. Sonia, however, remained calm, her mind made up. She told Rose to stop visiting her if all she wanted to talk about was Mark. The conversation ended with Rose storming out of the house, filled with anger and disbelief. She went straight to Mark, recounting Sonia's words and her refusal to consider his proposals. Mark was livid, unable to comprehend why Sonia would fall for a man like Henry. As Mark seethed, Rose's emotions shifted. She was angry, but not just at Sonia, also at Mark. She had always been by his side, helping him, yet he never looked her way. Why was he so obsessed with Sonia when Rose had everything he could want? Rose confronted Mark, asking him why he was wasting his time with Sonia when she was right in front of him. Mark, however, didn't flinch. His heart was set on Sonia, and he valued her humility, homeliness, and quiet strength, qualities that Rose lacked. Rose's jealousy grew into hatred as she listened to Mark praise Sonia. From that moment on, Rose harbored a deep resentment for Sonia, a resentment that would only intensify with time. As Rose walked away from Mark, her mind was racing with thoughts of how to tear Sonia down. Mark's rejection had stung, but what hurt more was that Sonia, the girl who had nothing, seemed to have all the love and admiration that Rose craved. Meanwhile, Sonia and Donald worked tirelessly at the village market, selling fruits and vegetables to raise money for Henry's surgery. Despite their efforts, The money they raised was nowhere near enough. Donald knew he couldn't let this go on. Henry's condition weighed heavily on his heart. One evening, after a long day at the farm, Donald made a decision. He had 2 pieces of land, the only valuable things he owned, and he was willing to sacrifice them to help Henry. Donald's ancestors had passed down their land to him, and it was his family's last connection to their heritage. However, Donald's compassion for Henry's suffering outweighed his attachment to the land. That night, he decided to sell one of the plots to raise money for Henry's surgery. The next day, Donald quietly sold the land, his heart aching with the knowledge of what he was giving up. But he couldn't let that stop him. This was Henry's chance to be free from his wheelchair, and it was a sacrifice he was willing to make. Donald returned home with the money, eager to share the news with Henry. When he arrived, he found Henry sitting quietly in the living room, gazing out the window. With a smile, Donald told Henry that the money for his surgery was ready, and that he had sold his land to make it possible. Henry's face went pale as he struggled to comprehend the sacrifice Donald had made for him. Guilt washed over him like a wave, and he couldn't stay silent any longer. At that point, he was forced to confess to Donald that he wasn't really a beggar, that he wasn't poor. He explained how he was actually a wealthy man, a billionaire who had come to the village disguised as a beggar to find true love. Donald stood frozen, listening in disbelief as Henry revealed the full story. The air in the room felt heavy with the weight of Henry's words. After a long silence, Donald's face hardened, and he stormed out of the house, unable to process the betrayal. Sonia, who had been nearby, saw her father rush out of the house and hurried inside to find Henry sitting there, his face filled with guilt. She demanded to know what had happened, and Henry confessed to her just as he had to her father. Sonia stood there, speechless at first, her emotions swirling. When the truth finally hit her, anger surged through her body. She looked at Henry with a mixture of disbelief and rage, tears welling up in her eyes. "How could you?" she asked, her voice filled with hurt. "How could you deceive us like this? My father sold our land, our last hope for a better future, all for someone who never needed our help in the first place." Henry tried to explain, pleading with Sonia to understand his intentions. But she couldn't listen. The weight of what had happened was too much for her to bear. She turned her back on him, tears streaming down her face, and walked away to her room. The house was quiet that night, the air thick with pain and betrayal. Donald stayed outside, lost in his own grief, while Sonia cried herself to sleep. Henry, filled with regret, sat alone, unsure of how to fix the damage he had caused. As the news of Henry's true identity spread through the village, whispers filled the air. Neighbors gathered in corners to discuss the shocking revelation. The man they had pitied for months was not who they thought. When the news reached Mark, it felt like the ground beneath him was shaking. He realized that his dreams of winning Sonia's heart were over. How could he compete with a billionaire? The woman he had spent so long chasing would never look his way now. Mark's desperation grew, and with no other options, he decided to visit Rose. He arrived at her house, his pride bruised but determined to salvage what he could. Standing before her, he told Rose that he was ready to be with her, ready to start a relationship now that Sonia had rejected him. But Rose's response wasn't what he expected. She burst into loud laughter, her voice echoing through the room. She looked at Mark with a mix of amusement and disdain. "You must be out of your mind," she said, "to think I would ever marry someone like you." Mark stood there, stunned, his heart sinking as Rose's words cut deep. "You're a fake," she said, her voice sharp. "You've been pretending to be rich, flaunting cars and clothes that aren't even yours. You're a fraud, Mark." Mark's face drained of color as his secret was exposed. Rose had discovered the truth, that he had been living a lie to impress Sonia. Humiliated, Mark turned and walked away, his head hanging low in shame. He had lost everything: Sonia, his dignity, and now even Rose's respect. The next morning, Henry gathered his courage and went to speak to Sonia. He had spent the night thinking about his lies, the pain he had caused, and the future he still hoped to build with her. Henry knew he had made mistakes, but his feelings for Sonia were real.
He found her outside the house, her face still marked by the pain of the past few days. Henry approached her slowly, his heart heavy with regret. He told Sonia that he was ready to take her back to the city with him, to make things right, and to give her a life where she would never have to struggle again. But Sonia's face remained hard, her eyes filled with sadness. She told Henry that she couldn't go with him, that the wounds from his deception were still too fresh. Henry tried to explain himself once more, but Sonia's mind was made up. Without another word, she turned and went to find her father. As they walked away, Henry stood there, watching them disappear down the path. His heart ached, knowing that his lies had cost him more than he ever imagined. At the farm, Sophia worked silently beside her father, her mind swirling with thoughts of Henry. She had cared for him deeply, had even started to imagine a life with him. But the betrayal was too much to bear. Meanwhile, Rose came to see Henry, pretending to be concerned about his well-being. But her real plan was to twist the truth and drive a wedge between Henry and Sophia. Rose told Eric that Sophia wasn't as good as she seemed, that she was pretending to be a decent girl but wasn't. Henry didn't know what to believe. Rose's words hit him hard, and he began to doubt Sophia's intentions. But then Rose revealed her true intentions. She told Henry that she liked him, that she had admired him from the start. Henry saw through Rose's manipulation and asked her why she hadn't said anything sooner. Rose quickly replied that she was waiting for the right time, but Henry wasn't convinced. He told her that he knew what she was doing, she was after his money. Rose's face turned red with anger and shame as Henry rejected her. She stormed out of the house, embarrassed and upset. Days passed, and Henry tried everything to convince Sophia and Donald to come with him to the city. He apologized over and over, explaining that he never meant to hurt them. But the damage was done. Sophia couldn't trust him anymore, and Donald felt betrayed. Henry felt sadder and more lost than ever. This family, who had shown him real kindness, didn't care about his money. They had taken him in, given him food, and treated him like family when they thought he had nothing. It was the love he had always wanted, but now, because of his lies, he had ruined everything. Henry decided it was time to leave the village, knowing that staying any longer would only cause more pain. As he packed his things and got ready to go back to the city, Henry sat in the house one last time, remembering all the moments he had shared with Sophia and her father. He looked back one last time as he walked away, his heart aching with regret. The love he had been searching for his whole life had been here, but he lost it because of his lies. No amount of money could fill the emptiness he felt now. The love he had ruined was something money couldn't buy. As Henry walked away from Sophia's home, her heart shattered, and tears streamed down her face. She had fallen in love with Henry despite everything, and now he was gone. Her mind was full of regret, questioning why she had let him go, why she had allowed her anger to push him away. Though he had lied about his identity, she knew deep down that he had a good heart. She had seen the kindness in his eyes and felt the warmth in his presence. Now all of that was gone, and she couldn't help but feel that she had made a terrible mistake. As Henry arrived at his family's mansion, his mother was the first to see him. She ran to him, her arms wide open, and hugged him tightly, tears of relief in her eyes. "Thank God you're back," she said, holding him close. "We were so scared. Where have you been?" Henry sighed deeply and sat down to explain everything. He told her about the village, how he had pretended to be a beggar to find true love, and how he had met Sophia and her father. He told her how kind they were, how they had taken care of him, and how he had fallen in love with Sophia. His mother listened quietly, her heart softening with every word. She felt pity for her son, understanding how much this family had meant to him. When Henry finished his story, his mother looked at him with sadness in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Henry. It sounds like they truly cared for you, but life can be cruel sometimes. Maybe it's for the best. You will find love again, I'm sure." Just then, Henry's father entered the room. He was a tall, stern man, a successful businessman and politician who was well respected in the political world. His father had been focused on one thing for the past year, becoming the governor. He had connections, plans, and strategies to ensure his victory in the upcoming election, and for him, everything was falling into place, except for one thing, Henry's marriage. Henry's father barely glanced at him before heading straight to his study. Henry followed him, knowing that he had to explain everything. When he reached his father's office, he stood by the door, waiting for his father to acknowledge him. "Father, I'm back," Henry said. His father nodded without looking up from his papers. "So you finally decided to return. Where have you been all this time?" Henry explained the entire situation again, hoping for some understanding, but as he spoke, his father's face remained cold and indifferent. When he finished, his father leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Good," he said after a moment of silence. "I'm glad she rejected you." Henry was stunned. "What?" His father continued. "I never supported this nonsense from the beginning. Going off to a village pretending to be someone you're not, all to find true love. It was foolish." Henry's heart sank. He had hoped for at least a little sympathy from his father, but he should have known better. His father had never cared about love or emotions. For him, everything was about business and connections. "Listen to me, Henry," his father said, his tone sharp. "You are my only son, and I have a lot riding on you. I have already made plans for you to marry Chief Matthew's daughter. You know this. Chief Matthew is key to me winning the governorship election, and I won't let anything stand in the way of that. You must marry her, or I will not take it lightly with you." Henry's chest tightened with anger and frustration. "But I don't love her," he said. "I don't even know her." His father slammed his fist on the desk, causing the papers to scatter. "This is not about love," he said. "This is about power, about our family's future. Chief Matthew's daughter will secure my position as governor, and you will marry her, whether you like it or not." Henry stood there, speechless. He had always known that his father was controlling, but this was too much. His father was willing to sacrifice his happiness just to secure his political future. "You have one job, Henry," his father continued. "And that is to marry Chief Matthew's daughter. I don't care about this girl from the village. Forget about her. She's nothing compared to what you could have." Without another word, Henry turned and left the room, his mind in turmoil. He knew he was facing a battle, not only with his father but with himself. Could he really go against his father's wishes and follow his heart, or would he be trapped in a life he didn't want just to please his father's ambitions? Henry couldn't take it anymore. The weight of his father's expectations and the pressure to marry a woman he didn't love were too much. One evening, he went to his mother and told her he was leaving for the village. He couldn't imagine his life without Sophia and her father, who had shown him kindness beyond anything he'd ever experienced. He explained to his mother that he wanted to be with them, to live a simple life free from all the pressure of his father's political plans. His mother worried, trying to convince him to stay, telling him how dangerous it was to defy his father, how their family's future was at stake. But Henry wasn't listening. His heart was with Sophia and he was ready to go back to her. The thought of living his life with someone else made him sick. He packed his things quietly and before his father returned home that night, Henry was already on his way back to the village. When he arrived at Sophia's home, she was surprised but overjoyed. Her heart leapt when she saw him standing at the door. She had missed him terribly and feared she'd never see him again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she welcomed him back into their simple home. That night they sat together talking about their future, about how much they had both suffered in his absence. Henry knew he had made the right choice. His heart felt lighter now that he was with the woman he loved. Meanwhile, back in the city, Henry's father came home and learned from his wife that their son had left. He was furious and yelling that he would send his men to the village the next day to drag Henry back, whether he liked it or not. His wife, seeing his anger, tried to calm him down. She knew how much Henry meant to both of them, and she also knew how stubborn her husband could be. That night she sat him down and told him they needed to take a different approach. She suggested that instead of forcing Henry back, they should allow him to bring Sophia and her father to the city. Once they are there, she could offer them a large sum of money to leave their son alone. Henry's father, still seething with anger, paused for a moment. His wife's plan made sense to him after all. Everyone had a price, and because of that, he was able to calm down. Henry's mother had seen the love in her son's eyes when he spoke about Sophia. She decided to help him, calling him to say that he could bring Sophia and her father to the city. Henry was overjoyed and quickly shared the news with Sophia, who told her father, Donald Donald, who had never been to the city, was excited to see a new world and grateful for Henry's family's help. When they arrived in the city, Henry's father sat Donald down and told him that he had bought them a house and arranged a business for him. Donald was overwhelmed with happiness and thanked Henry's father profusely. However, things took a dark turn when Henry's father visited Sophia alone and threatened her, telling her to stay away from Henry or else they would disappear. Sophia was gripped with fear and told Henry everything. Henry was furious and confronted his father, who had gone back on his promises. Henry went to Chief Matthew's house and told him that he would never marry his daughter, even lying that Sophia was already pregnant with his child. This news enraged Chief Matthew, who stormed out of the house and went to Henry's father, telling him that he would never support him in his run for governor. Henry's father was furious and desperate to save his political career. He tried calling Chief Matthew several times, but the chief refused to pick up. Frustration boiled within him, and his anger soon turned to Henry. He warned him that if he lost the election, there would be consequences that he couldn't even imagine. The day of the election finally arrived, and Henry's father anxiously waited for the results. But when the announcement came, it shattered all his hopes. He had lost, and the other political party had won the governorship seat. The defeat filled him with rage, and he blamed Henry for it all. Blinded by anger, Henry's father made a horrible decision. He sent his men to Donald's house with orders to teach them a lesson. That night they arrived at Donald's simple home and brutally attacked the poor man. They beat him so severely that he fainted, lying motionless on the floor. When Sophia returned from the market later that evening, she found her father lying on the floor unconscious and barely breathing. Panic surged through her, and she screamed for help. With the help of some neighbors, they rushed him to the hospital. Tears streamed down her face as they drove as fast as they could. At the hospital, the doctor took one look at Donald and quickly went to work. After what felt like hours, the doctor came out and told Sophia that if she hadn't brought him in when she did, her father wouldn't have survived. It was a miracle he was still alive. Henry rushed to the hospital as soon as he heard the news. When he saw Donald lying in the hospital bed, bruised and weak, his heart sank. This was the man who had welcomed him into his home, the man who had cared for him without knowing his true identity. Seeing Donald like this broke something inside Henry, and he couldn't hold back his tears. He knew this was all his father's doing, and it filled him with guilt and sorrow. The only family that had ever shown him real love was suffering because of him. Sophia sat by her father's bedside, holding his hand silently, crying. Henry joined her, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. He knew he had to make things right, but at that moment, all he could do was sit with Sophia and pray that Donald would survive. When Henry got home after the emotional day at the hospital, he was filled with anger and pain. His heart pounded with every thought of Sophia's father lying in that hospital bed, barely hanging on to life. He couldn't take it anymore. His father's greed and cruelty had gone too far. In a fit of rage, Henry stormed into his room, opened his drawer, and pulled out a gun. His hands trembled with a mix of fury and determination. For the first time in his life, he felt ready to stand up to his father, no matter the cost. Henry marched downstairs to his father's study, where the older man sat with a glass of whiskey in hand, still seething from his election loss. The door burst open, and Henry's father looked up, startled by the sudden entrance. Henry stood in the doorway, holding the gun firmly in his hand, his face darkened with anger. Without a word, Henry raised the gun and pointed it straight at his father. The shock on his father's face was immediate. He had never seen Henry like this. His son, who had always been so obedient, so respectful, was now standing in front of him, threatening him with a gun. Henry's voice was cold and steady, a tone his father had never heard from him before. "If Sophia's father dies," Henry said slowly, "then you will die." Henry's face remained hardened, but he could see the change in his father's expression. Guilt was etched on his face, but the damage had already been done. Henry lowered the gun slightly, his voice still cold. "Fixing this won't bring back the trust you've broken," he said. "You can't undo what you've done." His father nodded, understanding that words wouldn't make up for everything. "I know," he whispered. "But I'll try. I'll call off my men, and I'll make sure Donald gets the best care. I'll make things right." Henry stood there, still breathing heavily, the gun now lowered completely. He didn't know if he could trust his father's promises, but he didn't want more violence. Slowly, he placed the gun down on the table between them. His father let out a breath of relief but didn't dare move. "I'll hold you to your word," Henry said firmly. "If anything happens to Sophia's father, I'll never forgive you, and I will never come back." His father nodded again, more tears forming in his eyes. "I understand, son. I won't let you down this time. I promise." Henry turned and walked out of the room, leaving his father sitting there in silence, overwhelmed by guilt and regret. For the first time, the weight of his actions truly hit him. He had nearly lost his only son, and worse, he had caused harm to a family that had done nothing but show kindness to his son. As Henry walked out of the house and into the night, he felt a storm of emotions. He wanted to believe his father, but years of disappointment made it hard. The only thing he knew for sure was that he had to protect Sophia and her father. They were the only people who had ever treated him like a real person, not like a trophy or a symbol of wealth. He made his way back to the hospital to check on Donald. When he arrived, he found Sophia still by her father's side, holding his hand, tears in her eyes. She looked up when she saw Henry and gave him a sad smile. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft and tired. Henry nodded, though his heart was still heavy. "I made sure my father won't hurt your family again," he said. "I promise you're safe now." Sophia looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She didn't say anything, just squeezed her father's hand a little tighter. Henry sat down next to her, taking her other hand in his. For a moment, they sat in silence, just two people trying to find some peace in the chaos. The love between them was real, but the challenges they faced were greater than either of them had imagined. Yet, in that moment, they knew they had each other, and somehow, that gave them strength. The next day, Henry's father arrived at the hospital, carrying the weight of regret on his shoulders. He had spent the night thinking about everything, how his greed had nearly destroyed the only family that had shown his son real love. When he walked into Donald's room, the air felt heavy with tension. Sophia sat by her father's bedside, and Henry stood near the window, his back turned. Donald, though still weak, managed a small smile when he saw Henry's father. He had heard the story from Sophia and knew the old man was partly to blame for his condition. But Donald, always a humble and forgiving man, believed in giving people second chances. Henry's father hesitated for a moment, then walked over to Donald's bed. He looked at the man who had been hurt because of him and felt shame burn deep within him. "I am sorry, Donald," he said, his voice low. "I've made terrible mistakes. I let my ambition blind me, and I hurt you and your family. I'm not proud of what I've done, but I want to make things right." Donald, still too weak to speak much, simply nodded. Sophia watched her father closely, waiting for his reaction. She had never seen him angry, but this was the first time she wondered if her father could forgive someone who had caused so much harm. After a long pause, Donald finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady. "Life is short," he said. "There's no room for grudges. What matters now is making sure my daughter is happy, and that your son is happy too." Henry's father, relieved, nodded. He had never met someone as kind as Donald, and he promised himself that he would do whatever it took to help this family from now on. Back in the village, things were changing for Rose. For months, she had been proud and boastful, always flaunting her beauty and hoping to marry rich. But after her fallout with Sophia and Mark, she felt increasingly isolated. Her plan to help Mark win Sophia's heart had failed, and in the process, she had alienated herself from everyone. That was when a man appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. He came to the village with expensive clothes and a shiny car, claiming to be a wealthy businessman looking for a wife. Rose, eager to show everyone that she could still win, fell for his charms quickly. He spoke of a big house in the city, cars, and a luxurious life. Rose was blinded by her desire for wealth and, before long, they were engaged. The man promised to take her to the city after the wedding, and Rose was convinced her dream had finally come true. But there was a dark secret behind this man's sudden appearance. He wasn't a wealthy businessman at all. In fact, he was a poor roadside mechanic. He had heard about Rose through Mark, who had grown bitter and angry after being rejected by Sophia. Mark had paid this man to trick Rose as a form of revenge for all the money she had taken from him. Always promising to help him win Sophia but never delivering. Rose, 6 months pregnant by the time the man came to her village, had no idea about his true identity. She was excited about the future, ready to leave the village and live the life she had always dreamed of. But when they finally moved to the city after the wedding, the truth hit her like a storm. Instead of a mansion, they arrived at a small, rundown shack near a noisy mechanic's garage. There were no cars, no wealth, and no luxury, just grease, noise, and hard work. The man, now revealed as a poor mechanic, had no money, no business, and no plans to take care of Rose the way she had imagined. He had used Mark's money to lure her in, and now she was trapped. Rose cried for days, realizing she had been tricked. What made it worse was that she was already 6 months pregnant with the mechanic's child. There was no escaping her fate now. She had spent so much time looking down on others, only to end up in a worse situation than she had ever imagined. Rose hated herself for her greed, for allowing herself to be fooled, and for turning her back on the people who had once been her friends. Now, she found herself trapped in a miserable life. She was stuck in a small, rundown home with a man she didn't love carrying his child, and with no escape. The city life she had once dreamed of had turned into a nightmare, and she had no one to blame but herself. As the months passed, Rose's bitterness grew. She regretted everything, the way she had treated Sophia, the choices she had made for money, and most of all, falling for a lie. But now it was too late. She was 6 months pregnant, tied to a man she didn't love, and living a life far from the dreams she had once boasted about. Meanwhile, Henry and Sophia's lives were blossoming with happiness. A month after their wedding, they seemed to be on top of the world. 3 months later, Sophia discovered she was pregnant. Henry was overjoyed, hardly able to believe he was going to be a father. He hugged Sophia tightly, his heart overflowing with joy. When Henry's mother heard the news, she was equally thrilled. Despite the rocky start between her and Sophia, she was now genuinely happy for her son. She couldn't wait to meet her grandchild and sent gifts and called Sophia often to make sure she had everything she needed. One day, Henry was overwhelmed with work and meetings. Sophia didn't want to disturb him, so she decided to drive herself to her prenatal appointment. Confident that she could handle it, she kissed Henry goodbye and left the house with a smile. As Sophia drove down the road, her car suddenly started making strange noises and came to a complete stop. She tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't move. Staying calm, she got out of the car and scanned her surroundings. Across the road, she spotted a small mechanic shop, so she decided to walk over and get some help. As she crossed the road, she noticed a woman sitting by the roadside, eating a loaf of bread. The woman's clothes were ragged, and her hair was messy. Sophia took a closer look and couldn't believe her eyes. It was Rose, her former friend. Rose looked up and immediately recognized Sophia. Her eyes widened in shock as she took in Sophia's appearance, her beautiful dress, her glowing skin, and the clear signs of happiness in her life. Tears welled up in Rose's eyes as she explained everything to Sophia. She had lost everything after Mark's betrayal. Her life had spiraled out of control, and she ended up with a man who lied about his wealth. When she realized the truth, she was already pregnant. He left her, and with no one to turn to, Rose had been living on the streets, struggling to survive. Sophia listened quietly, feeling a mixture of pity and sadness for Rose. Despite everything that had happened between them, she couldn't ignore the pain in Rose's voice. Before she left, Sophia pulled out her checkbook, wrote a generous amount, and handed it to Rose. "Use this to start a business," Sophia said softly. "I hope it helps you get back on your feet." Rose was overwhelmed with gratitude. She couldn't believe Sophia, the same woman she had once mocked, was now helping her in her time of need. With tears in her eyes, Rose thanked Sophia over and over. Sophia smiled gently and walked back to her car. After getting help from the mechanic, she drove off, feeling a sense of peace for helping Rose. Later that evening, when Henry got home, Sophia told him everything that had happened. Henry listened and then said, "It's good you helped her. It's never right to look down on others. Life can change in unexpected ways." Sophia nodded, knowing that her kindness had made a difference, not just for Rose but for herself.
Held out her hand and her smile so bright. They faced the world with nothing but